سلام او درناوی تاسو د ریسپانس یا د پاسخ لومړنۍ خپرونه ګورئ. موږ په دې خپرونه کې هڅه کوو چې د افغانستان په هکله د نړیوالو بنسټونو او هغو څیرو نظریات په دې پروګرام کې له تاسو سره شریک کړو چې د افغانستان په قضیه کې جدا هیل دي او یا هم په دې هکله هغه مسایل له تاسو سره شریکولی شي چې تاسې د ځواب لټلو په لټه کې یاستئ. په لومړۍ خپرونه او پروګرام کې مو له ځان سره دا ځل د افغانستان لپاره د ملګرو ملتونو د پخواني ځانګړي استازي کای ایده سره وخت اخیستی دی او په دې پروګرام کې به هغوی له ځانه سره ولرو. کای ایده په افغانستان کې د سخت ماموریت په اوږدو کې په افغانستان کې پاتې شو. ټاکنې ټاکل شوې وه د هغو ټاکنو په څیر شي چې افغانستان بالاخره له هغې وروسته تجربه کړې او په پایله کې د ملي یووالي حکومت رامنځته شو. هغې وخت کې هم حامد کرزی او دغه راز ډاکټر عبدالله دوه هغه څیرې وې چې د جان کیری په وسیله هڅه کېده چې د ملي یووالي ورته یو ساختار او جوړښت رامنځته شي. خو دغه ډول یو کار کې د کای ایده نقش د پام وړ د افغانستان په هکله ځانګړی کتاب هم ولیکه. له دغه ماموریت وروسته دې کتاب ته یې نوم ورکړه افغانستان کې د واک پر سر شخړه چې په هغې کې له ځینو مسایلو پرده هم پورته کړه. دا چې اوس افغانستان له یو حساس پړاوه د تېرېدو په حال کې دی، په ټوله کې هغه مسایل له دوی سره شریکوو چې دوی یې په هکله نظریات لري. د افغانستان سوله، د افغانستان راتلونکی او روان سیاسي وضعیت د دوی له قوله اورو. Mr. Eide, thank you very much for finally making this happen.
Thank you very much for letting me join you.
You are most welcome to our show, Response, and I will come up with my first question. Afghanistan has been going through very hard situations, particularly when we talk about peace issues in Afghanistan, and there is that era of the history that for the first time Taliban and Afghan government's authorities are sitting face to face in Doha and they are talking. They already finished their first phase of the talks and they will soon start their negotiation and second term right there in Doha on 5th of January. As you better know, how do you see the peace process overall in Afghanistan?
I think it has proven to be difficult so far, and that will be perhaps even more difficult in the period to come. You know, it took a very long time to agree on the modalities. That did not surprise me much because I have experienced myself planning for a conference, and we had preparatory talks that were supposed to last for a week and they lasted for 6 weeks. So it's often difficult to get through the first hurdles. But at least the negotiations are underway and will start again now on the 5th of January. My question is, of course, are the parties well enough prepared for this new round, which is a round of substance and not of procedure anymore?
Yeah, they will be talking on the agenda. So you asked the question. What if I ask the same question? How do you see? Are they ready?
I'm skeptical, I must say. I read news from Afghanistan twice a day, I must say. And it seems to me that on the government side, there has been a bit too much confusion, I think. One prominent politician said the other day that there was a need for a consensus. That's absolutely right. I saw also that the new technical team was to be established now. The High Reconciliation Council was only recently fully established. In one article it said that the guidelines and roadmap for the next phase has not yet been finalized. You know, that leaves me a little bit worried if Kabul is really sufficiently prepared for this. And let me then turn also to the Taliban. I sometimes wonder if the Taliban really knows what they want and can expect from this second round. Are they prepared for it? In Kabul, of course, the Kabul delegation, the government, know precisely, I assume, what they will talk about and what the implications are. The Taliban have so far been used to discussing military matters and not political matters. Now, this is much more difficult. You know, when you discuss military matters, and so far with the Americans, it's a question of numbers, it's a question of number of troops, a number of months, and so on. And now this is going to be much more difficult. So I think it would be good to be as well prepared as possible in order to succeed.
We will come first with U.S. Taliban negotiation and talks in Doha that ended up on February 29th. And it was a result. The result was the agreement between two sides. How do you see that agreement? There are two main factors in this agreement. First, the U.S. has pledged the Taliban side they will withdraw at the end of May. And they're emphasizing, particularly Trump's administration. Secondly, the Taliban has pledged to cut their ties with Al-Qaeda, and they will have no ties with other terrorist groups in the country. How do you see these pledges and overall that agreement? Is it for peace, really?
Well, it's a first step. I must say I was myself surprised when I saw the final deal between the US and the Taliban, because there's a lack of symmetry here in a way, right? A withdrawal process is something you can measure and you can see it. It is verifiable. What the Taliban has agreed on, you cannot see. It's not verifiable. It's a statement, a promise. So these are, what should I say, commitments of a completely different nature. That worried me a bit. And of course, you are in a situation where the US government, and particularly the Trump government, wants to get out of Afghanistan, wants to get out of the Middle East, to end the endless wars, as I say. Okay, but that's a different objective from wanting peace. That's a more complicated and much more encompassing ambition. I was a little bit surprised to see how the US Taliban agreement was shaped in the end.
They pledged they will withdraw their troops, as I said, at the end of May. Do you believe that US is leaving Afghanistan finally?
Well, that may well be true. You know, I must say it has been easy to drag out the process and think that Biden will do it differently. I'm not so sure. You know, when he was vice president, he was the person in the administration who argued for a smallest possible footprint. As you will remember, when Stan McChrystal shaped his surge, Biden was the most skeptical person of all in the administration. So I'm not sure that he will, or I'm not convinced at all that he will reverse Trump's decision. What I had hoped perhaps had been that the words conditions-based had been a reality and not only a term that you throw out there and to reassure somebody. I think that that would have given more leverage in the negotiations that are now to start.
This issue has been very controversial. It was always argumentative, and at the end of the day, no one knows what's happening. As you mentioned, and you said that you were concerned about issues. Afghanistan has the same concerns. When we see the agreements, the peace process in Afghanistan or about Afghanistan, it reaches to the agreements. There are negotiation tables right away in one of the Arab countries and Qatar's capital, Doha. And what we see in the country, the war erupted. There are very much other issues like assassinations, the dark sides of the murders, the civil society, journalists, and everybody is at risks. And it's unprecedented till 19 years. So what's going on? Is it peace? Like if we see, they're talking, but we see in the field, no one claims the responsibility about that text most of the time, especially about the assassinations of the civil society and journalists and others. But when we say the Taliban reject, the government claim it's Taliban, sometimes Daesh or the ISIS came along and they claim the responsibility. But the people, they're confused. war erupted, negotiation tables are set, and confusion is erupted throughout. How does it look like? And how do you express the situation according to your own views?
Well, you're sitting in Kabul, I'm sitting in Oslo, which is a little bit further away, to put it mildly. I had expected that when the agreement between the US and Taliban was reached, that all the spoilers would come out. I think that's happening. Probably a number of the incidents you see are Daesh instigated. A part is Taliban. It's very hard to distinguish, but it leads, of course, to a heated atmosphere where those in the political circles in Kabul who do not want to progress with the peace talks can use this as an excuse to say, look, the Taliban again, they don't want to admit, they're hiding their face, but they really don't want peace. So I think it's very difficult, but there has to be an attempt to keep the nerves as calm as possible. There's no doubt to anybody that Daesh is responsible for a number of the incidents that we are seeing, but I'm also worried about the level of violence, and I think that is something where the Taliban could have reassured the government and the international community, and to be more clear that yes, we will reduce violence significantly, and we will do it in a way that is visible to you all. I cannot see that has happened. I must say the killing of civilians in various parts of Afghanistan, the attacks are ongoing, and also I must say the attacks against infrastructure, bridges, roads, etc., is highly counterproductive, and I wish that would stop immediately. So a ceasefire, I think, of course I would like that, but I think it's unrealistic at this stage. But a significant and in some way verifiable reduction of violence is a must now. It's absolutely necessary, I think, in order to make sure that the negotiations survive.
What is your knowledge of Khalilzad?
I met him a number of times since I was a special representative, and also afterwards. Last time I met him was 2 years ago. I have not been in touch with him during the negotiations that he has conducted in Qatar, but I guess I know him fairly well.
Mm-hmm. So how do you find him in Afghanistan peace process? Was he successful?
Well, I find, first of all, I find him to be in a terrible squeeze with a president who probably insists every time there is a meeting in Washington, insists, I want the troops out and do it now. So it's not an easy situation for him to be in. I must say, I was sad when I saw the beginning of the negotiations, where obviously there was a lot of bad blood between him and the Afghan government. Could that have been avoided? I would have hoped so. It's not a good start when you start not having trust in each other. And you saw also the little explosion that came from your national security advisor when he visited Washington now a couple of years ago, which expressed the frustration of lack of consultations. And I understand that. There's nothing more important than consultations and trust when you have these kind of negotiations, where the main party to the conflict, the Afghan government, is not present. Then there must be full transparency and trust. My question is, was that the case, or was it not? Probably not.
He has drawn 4 major fundamentals for Afghanistan peace process. The 2 as already agreed upon, and the second one, it's Afghan negotiations to Afghans, and the 4th and very important one, it's ceasefire. Do you believe that these fundamentals are the really necessary and must fundamentals of Afghanistan peace process, or something is missing?
As I said, I would have liked a ceasefire to take place immediately when negotiations start, but I don't think it's realistic. I think what is realistic is a significant reduction of violence, and this is what we have seen also in other conflicts, that there is fighting and talks ongoing at the same time. The negotiations in Colombia went on for years, and the parties were fighting. But there has to be some kind of understanding now to reduce the violence, and a clear acceptance by the Taliban to make that happen.
We will later on talk about your experience about 2014 election in Afghanistan, when it seems the similar scenario like the election after that. We will talk specifically, but I'm gonna talk about one thing particularly now. How do you see Kabul? How is the government doing in Afghanistan? There are two 50-50% associates in the government, which you struggled in 2014 to avoid, and we will talk about it. But how do you observe current government of Afghanistan?
What I see in Kabul now is perhaps a lack of unity that is frustrating and damaging to the process, certainly. You saw the long time it took before the president was finally installed, and the, what should I say, a little comical situation, tragical also, where two so-called presidents conducted their inauguration at the same time, almost close to each other. I mean, that was not good for Afghan democracy. And then the long struggle that went on after that to establish an agreement between President Ghani and Abdullah. You lost a lot of time, and you lost a lot of good reputation abroad. You know, people were thinking, what is this? What kind of confusion is this? Can they not be able to unite when there is something so important, something that most people have been wanting for year after year after year? And then the Afghan leadership is not mature enough to get together and agree on something. I think that was shocking and terribly disappointing to most observers, at least in the West. And I think it was terribly frustrating to you Afghans, first of all. And what I'm afraid of is that this agreement is still underlying and hampers the efficiency of the government. When you have claims all the time that the agreement is not respected, etc. You see Dr. Abdullah doing his things, saying his things. You see President Ghani saying sometimes other things, and Vice President Saleh certainly on a more hostile note whenever he expresses his view on this. If you want to succeed, then you have to be united, and you have to demonstrate a united front. That makes you strong. Anything else makes you weak, and you cannot afford to be weak and to be seen as being weak at the time.
But the question about Dr. Abdullah, why he was a controversial face? You remember 2009 when you were special envoy of United Nations in Afghanistan, and it was the same scenario, but it was somehow avoided. What was the issue, and why Dr. Abdullah has been so controversial? And he says, I don't accept. And finally, at second term, after presidential elections, that the results goes away and washed away, and Dr. Abdullah is a partner of 50% in the government.
Well, that's Afghan politics, and I don't know if I should comment too much on that. You know, I think each.
But don't you see that it's more like a U.S. politics, not Afghan politics?
I see this as being old rivalries really playing out, and you know, back in 2009, John Kerry and myself tried to convince President Karzai to accept the second round of elections, and he resisted until one day he accepted to go for a second round. And what then happened? Dr. Abdullah withdrew. And why did he withdraw? Because he knew that he wouldn't win. So he was fighting for positions. he knew that a second election round would not be to his advantage, so he withdrew at that time. And I think even if President Karzai accepted the second round very reluctantly, it was a smart move in the end.
But don't you believe that the same scenario, 2009, 2014, and then the recent one, 2019, same scenario, same personality, same person, Dr. Abdullah, he has been there and he was emphasizing, I don't accept the results. Do you believe that it was Dr. Abdullah or someone else? What was the issue behind this?
Hard for me to say. I think Dr. Abdullah has been fighting for this position for a long time and for his own standing in the Afghan society. I was perhaps surprised that he was the other candidate this time. I thought it would be somebody else.
Mr. Kai Eide, you know everything about this. You have been the special representative of United Nations to Afghanistan. You have been witnessing the toughest election in 2009, and then you saw everything about Afghanistan from 2009 till now. So how was the role of Dr. Abdullah, and why he is controversial during election, and why he avoid accepting results? You better know. So kindly tell us what's going on.
But I don't think it's my task to make more specific comments about Dr. Abdullah's behavior. As I said, you're absolutely right. It's more or less the same scenario taking place for the third time. I don't consider it to be very constructive, but it happened, and it's certainly.
So let me ask you the other way. It's more an internal agenda or external one?
Oh, internal agenda, quite certainly.
How do you say that? U.S. has been involved in Afghanistan.
I think I think politicians often are. What should I say? They seek power, and he has done so. Well, that was your word, but they seek power, and he has done that 3 times now, and he's done it in a way that I don't think gives him any reason for pride, to put it that way.
And how do you see U.S. policies about Afghanistan? What's U.S. doing in Afghanistan? Don't you see it's really confusing, or the U.S. has lost things what to do in Afghanistan? You have already read Afghanistan papers. Washington Post and other U.S. newspaper published it, and you have carefully read it. So how was the end till now? They were withdrawing troops, they were bringing troops, they were changing policies and strategies regarding Afghanistan and Central Asia. And at the end they say, okay, we're going to negotiate with the Taliban, but without any presence from the Afghan side, the Afghan government, I mean. And then they come up with an agreement, and the agreement was very secret, top secret. I was in Doha in those days. And at the end, they say, okay, we are leaving Afghanistan in May. What's going on with the U.S.?
Because as I told you, Trump had decided one of the victories he would bring with him into the election campaign was to say, look, I ended the endless wars that we were all sick and tired of. He didn't manage to do that. I think his plan was not so well conceived. His objective had more to do with his own election campaign than anything else. I think that was very unfortunate. It happened much too often that elections come in the way of a strategy. And I think that happens here too. But when you look at American policy, at least since I was there and probably before also, I think the US, and the US, remember, the US decides on the Western strategy. It's not a NATO strategy, it's NATO countries putting their stamp on the US strategy. And I think the Americans never understood Afghanistan. I do not claim to know Afghanistan, far from it. But I think the Americans were real foreigners in Afghanistan and behaved like that throughout. And I remember some incidents of attacks that killed tens and tens and tens of Afghan civilians, and the American reflex was always to deny it until we could prove that it happened. And I was always astonished that they didn't learn anything from that. And at one stage, President Karzai irritated me with his strong words about the Americans, and then gradually, I guess I saw that he understood this country better than anybody else, and what he had his ears to the ground. He knew the sentiment around the country and could reflect them anyway. So my respect for him grew constantly during my stay there, I must say.
Let's start. These words were the first one. So you see Afghanistan peace process as a campaign agenda, a merry campaign agenda for Trump, and after 20th of January, it will be changed?
No, I think the question of withdrawal of American forces and international forces was only a matter of time. It would not have lasted much longer under any circumstances. But I say that this coincidence between election campaigns and a peace process like this is very unfortunate, very unfortunate. And I may say also, the discussion in Afghanistan, the coincidence there about discussing the peace process and at the same time the Afghan election process. Of course, this is not very fortunate when it coincides in that way. You would like to have a greater level of stability when you go into that kind of talks. It's not unusual, but it's never good.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eide. Stay with us. We are going to take a break. بیا هم راغلاست تامیو کایده په افغانستان کې د ملګرو ملتونو پخوانی استازی دوی د افغانستان په هکله کتاب لیکلی د افغانستان په هکله مسایل څیړي وخت ناوخته د افغانستان مسایل ټویټ کوي او په دې هکله لیکنې او څرګندونې هم کوي له ډېرې مودې وروسته موږ دوی له ځانه سره لرو او تم کیږو ورسره د افغانستان په روان وضعیت او احتمالي راتلونکي. Mr. Eide, what's your approach and what's your understanding of Taliban? Who are they and who were they before peace process?
Have they changed? I would say yes. Have they changed enough? That only negotiations can show. Do they look at their own? Do they think that they can rule Afghanistan again? No, I don't think so. Do they want a different relationship to the international community? Yes, I think so. Do they know how to get there? I'm very unsure. I think, as I said, their experience is from negotiating military matters now over the last 2 years, and their experience in negotiating civilian issues, political issues, is very minimal. So I often ask myself, do they also know where they are heading? Do they know what their red lines are? Sometimes I hear very combative statements from them regarding issues of key importance. And remember, when it comes to withdrawal of forces, you can say 2,000 troops, 5,000 troops, 7,000 troops. You can say 2 months, 4 months, 6 months. I mean, you have a variety of solutions. When it comes to some of the issues that will now be discussed, there is no compromise. Afghanistan is a democracy. Democracy means being 100% a democracy, where people elect their leaders through free elections. You cannot have half a democracy. You have to accept the system as it is. That will be a great challenge. Discussion on what kind of political system will you have. Another question is the question of the rights and freedoms of the individual Afghan. And here again, you come back to the question of Afghan women, Afghan girls, for everything from schools to positions and etc. When the Taliban says we accept the freedoms and rights of the women, well, you cannot do that 50% or 80%. You have to do it 100%. If not, the rights do not exist. The freedom of expression, it exists 100% or it doesn't exist. So in many of these cases, there are no compromises. You have to take one solution or the other solution. And that, I think, is going to be a very, very difficult issue to confront when the negotiations start.
Somehow, don't you think it seems like the US has also approved that there would be no republic, no democracy at all? Because in Doha Agreement, the last two articles clearly talk about new Islamic State. So how do you see the new, so-called new Islamic State? Would it be democracy? What it would be? Can you have any imagination of that?
No, I really cannot put myself into the Americans' head, and in particular to Trump's head, if he has thought about this. But what I can say is that from my own view, and my view doesn't matter much, but I must say, when it comes to these issues that I mentioned, a democratic system, the rights of the individual, I mean, I cannot see how they can be negotiated. You accept them or you don't accept them. How is that going to be played out across the negotiating table? I think that is going to be very, very tough. And of course, the Afghan leadership and the Afghan people and you journalists understand that much, much better than I do. There are some issues that are negotiable, and then there are some that are not negotiable simply because of the nature of the issue. So it will be hard, and that's why I think it's so important also that you get the violence down. You create a calmer atmosphere where negotiators can sit and discuss without being distracted by constantly having this kind of attacks in various parts of the country. You need a calm atmosphere, and you need a consensus among the Afghan politicians. Without that conviction and that consensus,
that's what I was very much eager to talk about right now. So how do you see that this consensus in Afghanistan? First, there are two rivals now allocated in a structure, a framework of a government. And then there are other politicians. Some day one says one thing, the other day there are other things coming out from their mouths. So how do you see the consensus in Afghanistan about Afghanistan peace process?
Well, I think lots remains to be done to reach that consensus, and that is also a give and take, of course. And first of all, I think, I mean, the fact that you have not, at least until recently, had your structure in place is to me absolutely shocking, and to me is a testimony of insufficient preparations, and that in a situation where we have known for a long time that we would come to this stage. So I think that as to the preparations, I mean the Reconciliation Council, I think all the members are there now. But that only happened very recently, and we have known about the need, we talked about this Reconciliation Council for months and months and months, and it's taken all this time. So is that foot dragging or what is behind? Certainly there are controversies among the government leaders. You're now setting up a technical team. Why didn't you set up that technical team long ago? Get a structure in place, discussing the agenda and the modalities and the guidelines and all that. Should have done that a long time ago. If you knew that these are difficult issues and you cannot continue discussing them up till days before the negotiations start. You should now be in a position where you have firm position, you're clear in your attitude, and there is agreement around them. I see also Amrullah Saleh, the vice president, constantly with what I would call rather poisonous statements. I think yes, we need a reduction of violence, but we also need a reduction in the level of polemics that are being thrown out, because they affect the atmosphere in a bad way. I see the president now raising the question again, although I think he put it aside, raising the question of having the negotiations in Kabul or some other place in Afghanistan. Why do that now? You have a place which is in Doha. It's quite normal that you discuss in a third country. In the Colombian conflict, they negotiated in Cuba, in Havana, with two international facilitators, among them Norway. But why raise these issues? They are only distracting from the central issues that are confronting you at the moment. So I think.
Why is it so, Mr. Eide? Why it's so argumentative, like the inflaming issues that are being raised by Kabul? For what purpose?
If I had been nasty, I would say that some of the leaders do not have their heart fully into the peace process. But I'm not nasty, so I will not say that. But had I been nasty, I would.
You say it, but you don't say it. So we will agree upon this.
Absolutely.
I will come up about the regional consensus. Pakistan, he has been emphasizing on a successful Afghan negotiations, and they say they're really much eager to finalize Afghanistan peace process and a settlement. They usually say the diplomatic words like a peaceful Afghanistan as first of all on the benefit of Pakistan. Yes, we do say this in Afghanistan too, but in actions, do you see still Pakistan believe in a peaceful Afghanistan?
That's a question that has troubled me for more than 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I would hope so. I would hope that there is a change of heart in Pakistan. But yes, but I've not been sufficiently involved with them to be able to say yes or no, and I don't think I'm ready to say yes or no in any case. I think there's always a bit of what should I say, duality in the Pakistani approach, and the Pakistani approach is important, but there is a tendency in many places where you have peace processes to blame the outside if things do not go well. Blame the Americans, blame the Pakistanis. In the Balkans, it's been the same. The Serbs blame everybody except themselves. And I think it would be worthwhile for Afghans to look a bit at their own behavior and say, have we done enough in order to make sure that the negotiations can go forward? That's the main question. That's the main question.
So what about Russia, China, and other powerful countries in Afghanistan and the region?
I think they also want a peaceful settlement. They see. I cannot see that they have any interest in a prolonged conflict in Afghanistan. If you look at the China, the border to China, there were reports in Afghan media the other day about 10 Chinese individuals having been caught. China is afraid of extremist movements along their border. Russia is afraid of extremist movements along the Central Asian countries. They have their concern also on this score, and I think they do want to see an Afghanistan that calms down and is no longer a breeding ground for extremist forces. For the Russians, this is a serious problem. Among all the foreign fighters who came to the Middle East to join the Daesh or the IS there, the greater part Russia represented the most important. I think there were about 50,000 Russians, if I'm not mistaken, who volunteered and participating down there. That is a warning signal for Russia also. They cannot accept to have this kind of movement, people coming back on their own soil and continue to conduct these kind of activities. It threatens their stability, and I think it's the same with the Chinese. They want the area to calm down.
Sensitivities between Afghanistan and the regional countries has been also issues of focus. But when we see the approach of Pakistan, they claim they want to help Afghanistan settlement. But how do you see India's approach and their role in Afghanistan peace process now?
I've always said you need to involve as many countries as you need, as much as you need. Don't involve more countries than you need, and don't involve them in substance more than you need to have them involved. I think there's always a question of trying to limit the number of players here. And when the process started, everybody wanted to be on board. Everybody wanted to have a share, and particularly if it goes well, of course. But I think if you would accept everybody to have some kind of role, some kind of share in the process, then you would be on the wrong track. Anyway, one of the aspects of that was, of course, where should we have negotiations? Should they be in Qatar? Should they be in Germany? Should they be in Norway? Should they be Indonesia, or where should they be? And I think I'm a Norwegian, so I would have been proud had they happened in Norway, but I think they should happen in one place. If not, you go on struggling between different countries. We want to have the next round. We want to have the round after that. That cannot be part of a peace process. Quarreling about these kind of issues.
And how do you see Iran? Shortly, I would like to talk about this. You've obviously heard Foreign Minister Zarif's comments about Afghanistan, particularly about Daesh or the ISIS, and the Afghans that were fighting on behalf of Iran, and the numbers reached thousands. And he accepted 5,000. And he said it was their wish. So how do you see? They call them martyrs. They say we facilitate them the weapons. And he confessed a lot of things. And this issue became really very controversial. So what's Iran doing regarding Afghanistan issues, particularly about peace?
Of course, Iran is in a conflict with the United States. I think when President Biden takes over, they will have to look at that again. I think that they will probably play their part in trying to calm down the temperature between Washington and Tehran. How that will be done, I don't know, but it's important for Iran. Being economically so pressed as they are now, they need to get out of that and be more constructive on the international scene. I cannot see that Iran has any interest in continuing the conflict on Afghan soil. Let me say, already from when I was in Afghanistan 2008, I remember there were rumors from very prominent American diplomats and politicians that Iran was providing weapons and ammunition to the Taliban. And I asked these people, do you have any kind of proof that this is the case? I never got a response. And then it died away. And perhaps a year later, the same rumors came. And as far as I remember, during my time, it was not proven in any substantive way that this is the case. But it's very hard now, and even harder than 10 years ago, to look through the propaganda. And there's a lot of propaganda on all sides here.
But when Zarif accepts it and he confesses about things, it's far more than a propaganda. They confess.
But did he? I'm sorry about that. But did he accept that they had provided weapons to the Taliban?
No, they don't accept. But do you believe that
No.
they will accept this, that we are providing facilities and weapons to the Taliban? And do you see
No.
if Iran, they will sit aside and watch what will Taliban do?
I
Of
think.
course, Taliban is against ISIS. Iran is also the enemy of ISIS. So don't you think two sides who are the enemies of one side, they will automatically become friends? Don't you think
Well,
it's
I
an
think you're.
obvious thing, a very simple formula?
I think it's not a simple formula. I think you're being too smart. Um, I think the overriding element for the Iranians in 2021 will be to try to shape a more constructive relationship with the United States. That is important politically, but it's in particular important to their economy, which is really in a very bad shape. I'm sorry.
Okay, sir.
That's
Let's come
that.
inside Afghanistan once more, and let's see how do you observe now your book. It's about conflict and war in Afghanistan just for power. The title very clearly says this. Do you see currently what's going on is just for power, or really a peace agenda? Everybody will accept each other, or it's again the same agenda.
The title was struggle, power struggle in Afghanistan. And yes, there was a power struggle. There was a power struggle between various parts of the Afghan political elite, even inside the government. But when I used the title "Power Struggle," it was mainly, I think, intended to describe the struggle between Afghans and foreigners, and in particular the United States. And who would set the agenda? Who would set the agenda? And I think the Americans gradually understood that their agenda had not been very successful. And when you read these Washington papers that came a year ago or so, then you see what the American diplomats and generals really thought about the situation. They had painted a picture of progress and victory coming, and they knew it was not correct. I remember in a defense minister meeting in I think it was in Istanbul or in Bucharest, February 2010, almost my last meeting. And then was General McChrystal outlining his surge strategy. And he was an enthusiast, and he could convince people. And all the ministers around the table said, "Oh, we're so happy, Mr. Chairman. We're so happy. Thank you very much, General McChrystal. Now we have a strategy. Now we can go back to our audiences at home and say we are going to win this war." There was such a fantastic, euphoric atmosphere around the table, and then the UN representative, Mr. Eide, was asked for his views, and I said, "Well, I think this is perhaps it's premature to celebrate. We're not there yet, and I'm not convinced that this will actually work."
Many believe this was the same agenda when every commander, every official was changing. They were celebrating, yeah, we got it, and we will be doing good now. We are winning in Afghanistan.
Exactly.
And
then
when we come talk about, yeah.
I have to finish it, because when we left the room and we got out in the hall, the Canadian defense minister, who I think agreed with me really, he came to me and said, "Why did you ruin this good atmosphere?" Because I thought it was necessary. It wouldn't be that easy. We all saw that you can pour in 140,000 troops, as it was on the maximum, but that doesn't mean you'll win the war. It doesn't mean that. That doesn't mean you can start administrating the country the way you want. I think there was in the US thinking about this. I don't know how many times they have changed strategies. For instance, when it comes to training of the police. And every time it was a success. Well, it wasn't such a success. And it's hard to make it as a success when you engage militarily in a country so far from your own shores. so far from your own culture, where you understand little. You walk around in your uniform, people cannot see your faces, you look like a man from a moon, and then you say that you are establishing confidence. Far from it. I think the same experience has been drawn in other places. When I was NATO ambassador, I was very critical to NATO moving out of area, as it was called. We had been in the Balkans, that was partially successful, but to move into a terrain that was so difficult from ours, I thought would be much more difficult. And in fact, it's very hard to say that any of these adventures have been a success.
Everybody, they are mesmerizing about U.S. failure in Afghanistan. Not only U.S. plus NATO failure in Afghanistan. Do you believe U.S. plus NATO has failed Afghanistan?
It's hard to use the word failed, but it's certainly not been a success. We did not achieve what we wanted to achieve. I mean, there has not been, the Taliban still exists. The Taliban over the last few years has probably become stronger than before. You cannot say that that's a success. Is it a failure? Well, certainly not a good development. The corruption is still there at the same level, I would say, and which was reflected at the conference recently in Geneva. Donor countries are getting sick and tired, the elections and democratic processes, much remains to be done. Although it's the right way to go. But maybe we underestimated the challenges Afghanistan was facing, and also did not understand what kind of country we were in. A country with a rich culture, a country with very warm, generous people, but very different from us, and you had to admit that. And I think President Karzai always reminded me of this. You're in a different place. You're in a different place, and he always said, "You're welcome to come here as a guest, but if you try to take over the house, then you're not so welcome anymore."
And finally, you accepted it.
Well, I think he was right in that respect. I think
With my last question, we got one more minute, Mr. Eide,
okay.
And it would be, how do you see Afghanistan's tomorrow? Will it be a brighter one, or just another series of chaos?
No, I think you will, if your politicians allow, you will go into a very serious period of negotiations. They will take time, but I do think there's a very good prospect for Afghanistan to coming out of this as a stronger country, politically, economically, respected in the world, and certainly there's nothing more we would like to see. And I would also like to see a new political elite coming out. And taking over. I know so many people in the bureaucracy, people in journalism, in the media, etc., who are well familiar with Afghan politics, but also how Afghanistan should relate to the outside world. And I think there's a lot of potential, but that potential has to be brought forward, and the old generation has to step aside gradually, and the sooner the better, I think.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eide, for giving us your precious time, and after finally a long time of struggling, we wish you all the very best ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me on your show.
Most welcome. فهمته که د رسپانس یا پاسخ دا خبرونه هم پای ترسو در بیان